talk about some aesthetics. James Harden definitely had a pregame meal, averaging 17 points per game over the last four.
Welcome back to Ball Don't Lie. Unlike Kyrie Irving, we actually did tell you guys ahead of time that we were not going to be doing our jobs. But all jokes aside, just like Kyrie Irving, we are also back here for Penn State Sports Night. I'm Hunter Pitcoff here, Matt Szczypiorski, and even though this trade happened a couple days ago, it's the elephant in the room. We got to talk about it. James Harden now is a Brooklyn Net. Matt, I actually got to give you credit because I was saying that I did not think he was going to get traded during the season. But you called this from the start, Matt. So what are your initial thoughts and reactions to when you heard the big news?
Well, obviously, Hunter, I'll take my props there. But I think it just got to a point where it was his situation. Houston was unattainable anymore. We all saw the press conference of him, saying pretty much calling out his teammate, calling out the organization. He did not want to be there anymore. And then we saw the trade materialize pretty soon after that. Him being in Brooklyn, it's obviously a good thing for him. It seems to be working so far through 2 games with him and Durant sharing the court. Obviously, Kyrie Irving coming back tonight, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how they mesh there. But I think overall good trade.
Yep. Kyrie Irving, you're right, Matt, is coming back tonight. Actually, they're versing the Cavs, so a little interesting return, if you will, against this.
Kyrie Irving revenge game, you say?
Yeah. I'm not sure he's played the Cavs with Boston, but I don't know if he's played them with Brooklyn yet or not, because he didn't play a whole lot of games last season. But just to give you the trade rundown, it was a 4-team trade. A lot of players got moved. The Nets, all they ended up getting was James Harden out of this deal, but they gave up so much to get him. The Rockets, they got Victor Oladipo from the Pacers, and then they got Dante Exum from the Cavs and Rodney Kurucs from the Brooklyn Nets. They got 3 first-round draft picks from the Nets, 2022, 24, and 26, and also the Cavs 2022 first-round pick, which is the rights to Milwaukee. So they'll be taking Milwaukee's pick essentially there. And then they got 4 first-round pick swaps for this upcoming draft, 23, 25, and 27. That is a whole lot of picks, Matt. And the Cavs, though, getting Jared Allen and Taurean Prince from the Brooklyn Nets. They also got the rights to Alexander Vezenikov. I hope I'm saying that right. He was the 57th pick in the 2017 NBA draft. Obviously, that was the big move that happened there. Just kidding. He probably will never play a game in the NBA. But then the Pacers also got Karis LeVert out of this deal, who had a terrific season with the Nets to start off. And we'll get into him a little bit later. But they also got a 2024 second-round pick from the Cavs, a 2023 second-round pick from the Rockets, and, of course, cash consideration. So, Matt, they gave up a whole lot. The Nets, this was a team that was considered really deep entering the season. Not only did they lose Spencer Dinwiddie with the torn ACL, but they also lose a ton of depth. So a thin bench here, but they got the star power, Matt. Is it going to be worth it?
I think it is in the long run. I think, honestly, this makes them the front runner in the East. I think, they obviously have more, while Boston has more depth, they have more star power than Boston does. And, the Bucks have a decent all-around team, but they are struggling with depth too. So Brooklyn, the biggest thing for Brooklyn in this deal is that they lost a center in Jared Allen, which is where they're thin already. They only have DeAndre Jordan now. We've seen their bench situation when they take DeAndre Jordan out of the game, they go with a little bit of small ball lineup. And I don't know if that's going to work necessarily in a 7-game series, but I also don't see how anybody's going to guard this team for a full 7-game series either.
Yeah, the offensive firepower, I think Charles Barkley called them the Dribble Brothers, as opposed to Splash Brothers. And that's pretty accurate because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden are all mainly ISO scorers. The only one that can play really well off the ball is Kevin Durant. Obviously, we saw him work really well in Golden State and even Oklahoma City when they had Russell Westbrook and James Harden there. And he's obviously he's more of a wing rather than a guard, and probably one of the most talented offensive players we've ever seen scoring a basketball in NBA history. I think the reason why I think it's worth making a big move like this is because I always think the teams that are the most aggressive are typically the teams that do the best. You look at the Lakers. Do you think they regret giving up all those players and picks for Anthony Davis? I don't think so, because they were hosting the Larry O'Brien Trophy this past season and winning it all. Do you think the Clippers regret giving up all those players and stuff for Paul George, as critical as I am of him? I don't think so. I don't think they are, because they also got Kawhi Leonard in that deal as well. You can even think of like some football references. Like you look at a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, who won the Super Bowl last season. They went out and they got Frank Clark, and they went out a couple years ago and got Sammy Watkins. Like, this is the teams that are most aggressive are the teams, in my opinion, that typically do the best. Obviously, there's such thing as calculated chances. You're not just going to throw a dart and just hope it lands. Sometimes that comes to bite you, like we saw the Celtics with Kyrie Irving. We saw the Timberwolves with Jimmy Butler. Like, it has to make sense. But for the Nets, they already have a really good team. It sounds like James Harden, obviously we know he wanted to leave Houston. That was obvious. But it sounded like he wanted to go to the Nets. That was a team that he wanted to go to. That's where all the rumors were pointing towards. So I do tend to agree with you, Matt. I think that this was the right move for the Nets. And I had them going to the NBA Finals entering the season. I think this would only help getting a 3-time scoring champion, James Harden.
Yeah, there's no way adding James Harden was going to hurt this team. You know, we've heard a lot of talks of how are they going to coexist, but I honestly don't see the issue. Like, you know, with Kyrie and KD, they already have a good relationship together, and adding James Harden, who's only going to help this team, who has played with Kevin Durant before, there's no way this is going to hinder this team. This team is going to be – they're going to put up a lot of points. I don't know how much defense they're going to play, but they're going to put up a lot of points.
That's the big thing, right? This team was very bad on paper on defense. They played slightly better than I think we thought entering the season, but this move does not help that at all. Because to play defense, you need a lot of able bodies to be able to guard some of the top players in the NBA for 48 minutes. And if the Nets somehow win the championship, they're going to be one of the worst defensive teams to ever do it. It's a big reason the Lakers won a championship, because yes, they had LeBron and Anthony Davis. We know what they do on the offensive side of the floor. But defense won the championship. Even when you look at the Golden State Warriors, it was defense. They were a historically great defensive team, like they were an offensive team. People do forget about that. Like, you have to be able to guard guys in order to win in this league. I've said it time in and time out. I get it's an offensive heavy league. Everyone can score 120 points. But if you can actually make it difficult on guys, that's what's going to be the ultimate difference. And like you said, Matt, you're not as concerned with how they're going to juggle the minutes and the shots. There's only one basketball there. How do you think Steve Nash in his first year is going to be able to kind of put Kevin Durant, Kyrie, and James Harden all in situations to succeed?
Well, I think Nash is a smart guy. We all know this. He's got a high basketball IQ, so he's going to know how to get them their shots. And I think, you know, even drawing up plays where, you know, maybe every time somebody comes down the floor, get the ball, make one pass to one of them, get them in isolation, let them do what they do. And as you said, you know, Durant's probably the only one that could probably play off of the ball. Kyrie and James Harden kind of create their own shots. Not that Kevin Durant doesn't, he certainly does, but he's probably the one that could play off the ball there in that situation. But listen, I say starting off, get each and every one of them minimum 15 shots a game. You have to, especially with Harden and Kevin Durant. Kyrie Irving can dish it out a little bit. But Harden's not looking to pass when he has the basketball. We've seen this, you know, from all his years in Houston, and even in the 2 games in Brooklyn. Whenever he's had the ball, he's pretty much shooting it. Kevin Durant, you know, he's going to get his 20 shots a game, as he should. He's one of the most efficient shooters in league history. So in terms of, you know, Steve Nash's job here and getting them all the ball, it's a great problem to have. It's like having a lot of great receivers in the NFL. We've a couple NFL references already. You know, it's just, they're gonna make it work, and Steve Nash is gonna do a good job making it work. And as we've talked about already, I think the challenge is gonna be what they're gonna do defensively, because you can't win every game 125 to 124.
No, I think that's the big thing here. And that's probably the biggest concern with this Nets team. But you never know. There could be some guys that maybe are post deadline cuts that we saw. We saw, let's say, the Clippers, they got Reggie Jackson last season. The Lakers got Markieff Morris last season. Both those guys are now with those teams still. So there could be some guys to be had. They don't really have a whole lot of assets to go get them at the trade deadline because they are all gone. But they at least, you know, people will want to come play for Brooklyn knowing that they are all in on a championship. Sean Marks, their GM, has obviously proven that this is what they're trying to do here in Brooklyn. But I respect the aggressive move. And at the end of the day, like you said, Matt, you just got to think of it. You just got one of the greatest offensive players of all time and have 3 of the most talented offensive players in the NBA. So are you really losing?
No, you're not. You're not.
Yeah. So Yeah, I'm very curious to see. Like you said, Matt, Kyrie Irving is going to be coming back tonight. By the time you listen to this podcast, it probably would have already happened. So we can't really update you on that. But we are curious to see how he looks. But that was the big storyline here, is that Kyrie just went missing. This guy was MIA and decided not to tell anybody where he was. We saw him at some family events. We saw him on a Zoom call for the district attorney in like Manhattan or something like that, trying to get some stuff done. Gotta give Kyrie Irving credit. Stuff people don't talk about, like he bought George Floyd's family a house. He does a lot of stuff outside the community or outside of basketball, and uses his platform for good. So you got to respect that. He always has. And, maybe media doesn't want to talk about that stuff. But at the same time, though, Matt, looking at basketball here, I can't think of a situation where you don't tell your employer you're just not going to show up for work and you don't get fired. I mean, there was rumors that the Nets were going to cut Kyrie Irving. I'm not sure Kevin Durant would have let that happen, but I'm sure it was discussed because they just had no idea when this guy was coming back. He didn't really miss that much time when you think about it, but just what are your thoughts on that and how Kyrie Irving handled the situation?
Well, I'll start off by saying the fact that he wasn't on the injury report was ridiculous, and he just didn't tell anybody that he wasn't coming to play. And then the fact that the Sixers were fined $25,000 for not putting Ben Simmons on the injury report when they had no players. But that's an argument for a different time. With Kyrie, this situation is tough for me because, obviously mental health is a big issue in today's society. And, with everything going on in the world and the riots, it seemed like Kyrie Irving was seriously personally affected by that. But then, also look at on the flip side where, most of the players in the league are African-American. And there's no way that they weren't affected by everything that went on as well. So for him to be like, I'm more personally affected by this than anybody else. I'm not going to show up to work today when, probably everybody else is affected by it too. So I understand his platform of wanting to take care of himself and take care of his mental health, which is respectable, but that doesn't mean you don't have to show up to work. And it doesn't mean, you just go MIA for 2 weeks. And that doesn't mean, you can not show up to work, but still go to a birthday party in a pandemic. It's a lot of give and take here. And we've seen a lot of Kyrie Irving making headlines for a lot of the wrong reasons the last couple of years, especially, but he's also made the headlines for a lot of good reasons as well. Like you brought up with buying George Floyd's family a house. So he's a good person deep down, but I think a lot of this stuff is, it's getting to a point where he's starting to become really overdramatic. And I think he needs to kind of work that out with himself, because we even saw Stephen A. Smith say, does Kyrie Irving really love basketball? And Kyrie Irving has said, I do love basketball. He said in his press conference yesterday when he came back to the team, obviously I love basketball, but now it's time to prove it.
Yeah, I mean, we were thinking, like, is this team, is he going to retire? Like, what's the deal with Kyrie Irving? Like, I remember, like, no one knew. And here's my thing. He's hard, like you said, Matt, and I think on Ball Don't Lie, we try to, be as fair as we possibly can. I really wanted to give Kyrie Irving the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, when you really think about it, like, even from a real life perspective, if someone just stops showing up to work, I think like my first reaction is why. Like, I'm not necessarily like, oh, screw this person, blah, blah, blah. Because obviously there's a reason behind it. And, Kyrie Irving, he has absolute right to not really talk about it or keep it close to the vest. He does not need to tell the media that. I 100% understand and respect that. But you got to at least tell your own organization what's going on. The fact that the Nets, you have Steve Nash and Sean Marks and your teammates just sitting there with their arms up like, I don't know where he is. That's where the issue is. Now, they don't need to air your dirty laundry and say, this is what's happening. But the fact that you didn't even keep your own team in the loop is a bad example. And while Kevin Durant is the best player, I do think Kyrie Irving is the leader of this team. He's the vocal one. You even see it on the court. Kyrie Irving's the one barking out orders, telling guys where to go. It was his idea ultimately to go to Brooklyn with Kevin Durant. He's the leader of this team, not the best player, but he's the leader of this team. And you're being a bad teammate by just throwing your guys out there and leaving them in the dust like that. I can't, there's, like you said, Matt, this pandemic and everything going on is taking a toll on everybody, right? Everyone. But, and some people handle it better than others. But you got to at least tell your own organization what's going on. I couldn't let anyone off the hook for that, because you're just putting other people in harm's way in a bad position to clean up your mess.
Yeah, and the fact that Sean Marks, came out and said, "Listen, I'm not going to defend Kyrie. I'm not going to tell you where he is. When Kyrie Irving comes back, you will have a conversation with him about this because I can't answer for him." And I think for Sean Marks to say that, I think it tells a lot about the situation because clearly he's frustrated about it, and clearly he didn't know what was going on. And he couldn't defend him, and he couldn't defend him being out for 2 weeks and not telling anybody where he was. And he couldn't defend him being out at a party in the middle of a pandemic with no mask on when the NBA has really, really strict rules and a bad situation going on right now with the pandemic going on within the league. So it's a tough situation for sure. But I think we're pretty agreeable on this situation. I think you got to at least tell your employer where you are if you're not going to show up to work.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit later about how the NBA is handling the pandemic, but I definitely have my criticisms about certain things. That includes the Kyrie situation. But I want to turn into another big traumatic thing that happened that's maybe getting a little overlooked because of the whole Kyrie situation, and that is in the Cleveland Cavaliers locker room with Kevin Porter Jr. There was a reported outburst that happened this past Friday. I don't know why there's always drama around this team. I don't know why food always gets thrown around this locker room. J.R. Smith was throwing Campbell's soup cans at assistant coaches a couple of years ago. We have not found out what he threw at Kobe Altman, the GM of the Cavs, but apparently what happened was newly acquired Taurean Prince, like we said, from the Brooklyn Nets, took Kevin Porter Jr.'s locker, and apparently Kevin Porter Jr. was, quote, began yelling and at one point threw food before getting, quote, combative with Kobe Altman. And Kevin Porter Jr., this is a guy who's really, really talented. I mean, entering that draft 2019, I thought he was a lottery level type of talent coming out of USC, coming out of Seattle, Washington, where he went to high school. But he's a troubled kid, and he's young, but very immature. And he was arrested on November 15th in a single car accident. Was charged with improper handling of a firearm in a motor vehicle, plus a misdemeanor marijuana possession and driving without a license. These charges were dropped in December, but it's looking like not very good there in Cleveland, at least for his future. He's either going to get traded. They're probably not going to get a whole lot back for him, or he's ultimately going to get cut. So, Matt, what were your thoughts hearing this whole situation play out, and where do you think Kevin Porter Jr.'s future lies?
Well, my thoughts went immediately the same direction you did. I was like, wow, this is not the first time a Cleveland Cavaliers player has been throwing food in that locker room. I immediately thought of J.R. Smith, but put a smile on my face. But I think we're all wondering the same thing. What kind of food was it that he threw? And what did he say when he threw it? But in all seriousness, I think there's no way a team is going to willingly give up an asset that they have for a guy that tried to fight his entire organization over a locker. Especially when he hasn't played all year and just joined the team on the bench in person this week. It seemed like there were reports that, he was having fun with the guys back on the team, being back with the team, being on the bench with the guys. But if you have a situation like that, they're not going to want him. Obviously, they're probably going to ask him to step away from the team, and if they haven't already. And, in terms of getting him to another team, nobody's going to want to give up an asset for that guy. So I think he's probably ultimately going to get cut.
Yeah, and another thing, he was saying that it was almost like, I think he said like institutionalized racism or something for the way he was being treated. And to take it out Kobe Altman, one, he drafted you, and two, he's black. Like, I don't think, don't get me wrong. I think, in terms of a bit broader picture, there's institutionalized racism everywhere. But I'm like, that, like to throw him under the bus like that, I'm like, that's a bad look for you. And at the end of the day, there's, you're allowed to be upset about something. That's fine. But there is a right and wrong way to deal with it. Like we talked about with Kyrie Irving. And this is definitely not the right way. Now, again, I would like to laugh at the food fight incident, but unfortunately, it seems like it's only one way. It's not like a whole team thing, not a team building exercise, throwing food in the locker room. It just seems like that's how they get frustrated. But yeah, this is definitely not a great situation. I hope he turns it around. I think ultimately, unless a team throws a second-round pick and somehow, wants to take a chance on him, I think he's probably going to get cut. It's a shame. I'm not saying it's going to be the end of the road for him. I think he's only about 20, 21 years old. We've seen guys all the time turn their around, being immature coming into the league. We've seen guys go through way worse and come back from it. So for Kevin Porter Jr., maybe a change of scenery is for the best for him, and he's able to learn from his mistakes and ultimately, be able to untap that potential he has.
Yeah, and I just don't see a way a team gives up an asset for this guy. He's not going to get traded. But he does have talent. He just has to get back on the floor. Where that will be the question.
Yeah. So I'm very interested to see his situation. But like we talked about earlier, the Pacers got a really good asset in Caris LeVert. I actually think that he's better than Victor Oladipo. Matt, I think you said you agreed with that one too.
Yeah.
I got into an argument with someone like a couple days ago. I said that Victor Oladipo's like extremely overrated. Good player, but he had one great season, and Caris LeVert is on the rise. But it might be a blessing in disguise he got traded, Matt, because unless if you haven't heard, audience here, they found an MRI revealing a small mass on Caris LeVert's left kidney. And if you don't know anything about when the NBA gives out physicals, they only do it at the start of the season. And if you get traded or go to a new team, that's the only time you're going to be required to get a physical. And perhaps maybe he would have got it with a doctor or something, who knows. But if it wasn't for him getting traded, he might have not known for a really long time that there is a mass on his left kidney. So for Caris LeVert, I really hope that gets resolved as quickly as possible, because he's an extremely talented guy, a guy who's missed a lot of time on the court due to other various injuries. But this one could potentially be even more life-threatening. But let's hope now. Let's cross our fingers there. Matt, what kind of player, or when he gets back, what kind of player do you think the Pacers are getting here? And do you think that this guy can help put the Pacers over the top in the Eastern Conference? Because the Pacers, I think we all kind of forgot about them because they've had a really good start to the season.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, Hunter. Is like the Pacers have quietly been one of the best teams in not only the Eastern Conference but in the league to start the season. They've played really great team basketball, kind of like the Spurs of the Eastern Conference, if you will. Not a lot of big name talent, but they play well together as a team. They kind of like the last season's Miami Heat in the bubble. And to add a guy like Caris LeVert who can score at will, is a great isolation scorer and can also score off the ball. He's obviously great with the ball in his hands. And adding a guy like that can score the way LeVert can will only help the team on the wings. And of course, the Pacers are playing without TJ Warren right now, who was one of the best scorers in the bubble last season in the league. So to get him back too will really help this team going forward. I think the Pacers can only get better from here. Now, in terms of if they're a true Eastern Conference contender, I don't know about that. I don't think they have the top-end talent to compete with teams like Boston, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, obviously, and Philadelphia. But I do think that they're a team to be reckoned with, and a team that would give any team a rough 7-game series.
I think that's kind of where I'm leaning toward also, Matt. I think this is a team that's going to not be an easy out. I mean, they were pretty easy out against Miami. They didn't even win a game. Nick McMillan got fired as a result. But yeah, the Pacers are facing a couple injuries right now. You brought up TJ Warren. He's been missing time. Caris LeVert is probably going to be missing time as well. And then Miles Turner actually fractured his hand as well. He's leading the league in shots blocked per game. He's always been an anchor. I believe he's led the league in that category before 2 years ago, I believe. But Caris LeVert, over his last 5 games, now this is without Kyrie Irving there, but he really, really stepped up, averaging 26.5 points, 7 assists, 5 rebounds on 50% shooting. So anytime the Nets needed him to really step up, he did. This was a guy who I thought was going to win 6th Man of the Year, but I imagine he's going to start for the Pacers. I don't think you make that move for him. Otherwise, he's kind of just coming off the bench out of necessity for Brooklyn and given all the talent they had at the guard position. But I'm imagining a starting lineup with Malcolm Brogdon, Caris LeVert, TJ Warren, Domantas Sabonis, and Miles Turner. I mean, and Sabonis, he's been really good this year. He's taken a huge step forward. Someone said he's almost like the Nikola Jokic of the East, which I don't know. I mean, they got similar-ish games, but gotta give Sabonis credit. I think a lot of people thought maybe it was fluky. He made the All-Star game last season, but he has taken a huge step forward and has been a lot better as well. So I agree with you, Matt. This is a team that gets it done on both sides of the ball. And I wouldn't be shocked if they can get a top 3-4 seed in the Eastern Conference. Maybe they wouldn't be a true title contender, but I could expect at least a great regular season from this team.
Yeah, when I think of this team, they give me a lot of. I mentioned, they kind of play like Miami Heat did last year in the bubble, but I think they would in a playoff series. I think they'd more model what the Oklahoma City Thunder did last season, and the fact that they will give any team a tough out, and they could probably take any team to 7 games. I don't know if they'll win the series, but they could definitely be a formidable enough team to take a team to 7 games and give them a tough time.
Yeah, I remember we did a sports night segment in the spring, this last spring, 2020, I guess. God, I'm trying to like blank, that felt so long ago. But and I remember we talked about that. I said, don't be shocked if the Thunder bring a team to 7 games, and you said that wouldn't happen. So I'm calling you out, Matt, but it's fine. You got me on the James Harden thing, so I get even. But
even
jokes aside, though. Another injury, unfortunately, that happened with CJ McCollum. And I didn't like him. This dude has been hooping this year. This is a guy who's probably one of the best players to not make an all-star game in the NBA. But he was averaging over 26 points, 5 assists, around 4 rebounds, shooting 47% from 3. 47% from the field, 44% from 3, 84% from the foul line. And he's going to be out for at least a month with a broken foot. Matt, what kind of loss is this for the Blazers?
Well, this is a huge loss for the Blazers. Obviously, they built the team around him and Dame Dollar being, those guys in the backcourt. And I think this injury, it's huge for the team and it's huge for him personally. We brought up the fact that he's never made an all-star game before. And I think he was probably trending toward the direction of making the all-star team this year with those stats. Shooting 44% from 3 is obviously huge, especially for that team. They like to shoot the ball, obviously, but I think this injury will keep him off the all-star roster this season. Just the fact that, you miss a month before the all-star selections and, it's going to really hinder your chances. I don't think they'll reward him with an appearance if he's forced to miss a month, which it looks like he is, especially with there not even being an all-star game this year. There's not like they can have like injury replacements or whatever. It's just, the list of guys. There's not like anything going on. So I think that hurts his chances, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, CJ McCollum is such a talented player. The thing I always respected about him is that he's never complained. He's completely fine with being the number 2 on that team behind Damian Lillard. He understands, but obviously still gets his shots. Still is able to be an effective player. Anytime in the playoffs, I feel like this guy's always been so good too, because we see a lot of great players flake out in the playoffs, and either they don't really elevate their game, or if sometimes they downgrade. CJ McCollum has always elevated his game in the playoffs, because Damian Lillard is going to require a lot of that, attention to defense. Teams are obviously looking at him, trying to stop him first. So that means CJ McCollum, you got to go out there and perform, and he almost always does. So he is a great player. I hope he's able to, get an all-star nod at some point, because he was off to the best start that he's almost ever been off to this season. But another guy who did come back was Ja Morant, and the Grizzlies are on a 5-game winning streak right now. So he came back pretty much right at the right time. They started to figure out how to play without him, which maybe is better for the team, because I kind of felt like he was carrying them a little too much and had too much on his plate. And you kind of wondered, can other guys step up? Well, it's looking like it, especially guys like Valanciunas, Kyle Anderson, Dylan Brooks, Grayson Allen, who I believe had that game winner just a couple days ago. And so let me ask you this, Matt. With Ja Morant now back and the Grizzlies being able to kind of catch their second win, do you think they can kind of climb their way back into this playoff hunt?
Well, yeah, I think they can, and especially since, as you mentioned, they were getting their groove back even before Morant came back into the lineup. And obviously having Morant, he's such a talented guy. He's obviously the face of that franchise. Only getting him back will only help this team in a crowded and competitive Western Conference. I think they're definitely one of those teams that's a shoo-in for that play-in tournament. Whether they'll get themselves outside of that remains to be seen. But I think they'll definitely at least make the play-in tournament, especially since, as you mentioned, they've learned how to play without Ja Morant, which is huge for not only, if he is to get injured, like a situation like this, but also when he comes out of the game and goes to the bench. So I think that's huge for the team. But Ja Morant getting back is obviously a huge, huge upgrade for them.
Yeah, Ja Morant, he is one of the budding stars in this NBA. A lot of people have said he could end up being the best point guard in the NBA in due time. But we're going to wait to see. I'm very excited to see him back. He's easily one of my favorite players to watch in the NBA. But another guy who also came back at that point guard position, looking over at the Eastern Conference, is Kemba Walker for the Boston Celtics. Didn't have a great, first game back for this season. Only scored 9 points on 3 of 13 shooting in I can't believe I'm saying this, 105-75 loss to the New York Knicks. They lost by 30 to the Knicks. Despite that, though, the Celtics have actually been a pretty good team, one of the best in the Eastern Conference, a true title contender, like you said, Matt. How good do you think the Celtics can become if Kemba Walker is able to get back into full form?
Well, as I've said before, they're a deep team with a lot of obvious star potential in Tatum, Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, and as of now, they're the top seed in the Eastern Conference on Wednesday, January 20th. But with that being said, I don't think they are better than Brooklyn. They could potentially be better than Milwaukee because I'm not entirely sold on the Bucks this season. And I think their 2-game series with the Sixers this week will tell us a lot about both teams, quite honestly. But I think Kemba coming back will only help this team in due time. He's just got to get his legs back under him.
Yeah, I agree. I think his role is going to be a little different. I think he entered Boston thinking that he was going to be the best player, and then Jason Tatum rose, through the ranks and became an All-NBA player. And now Jaylen Brown is probably easily the number 2 player on that team. So Kemba Walker is going to have to slide in there at being that third option, but maybe him coming back for an injury that's for the best, so he doesn't have to be, as much of a focal point on offense, and it can let him, like you said, Matt, get his legs back under him. And we all know that Boogie Down Kemba is still a bad man with that basketball. So I'm excited to see how good the Celtics are going to be. And like you said, Matt, that Sixers Celtics series, I'm sure you're really looking forward to it, and it should be some good basketball.
I don't know if I'm looking forward to it as much as I'm pretty scared for it, but yeah, I mean, if Seth Curry comes back, I mean, we're the best team in the NBA, so.
That's funny. All right. Yeah, I'm curious to see it, though. I will be unbiasedly watching the game, just watching good basketball. You might be a little bit stressed out, but understand.
I'll probably be screaming at the television, yeah.
That's fair. Just make sure that you throw one of those those squishy bricks, not with an actual brick at your team.
Oh yeah, definitely. I need a squish ball.
Yeah, I forgot what those things are called. I've seen them though.
Yeah.
But that's gonna wrap up around the association. We obviously brought that back. We were doing some conference and division previews. Now we're in the heat of the season. Basketball is actually back. We have something to talk about. But we're going to be doing our players of the week. We have not done that in a really, really long time, in a couple months, I think. Matt, I dug pretty deep in my bag for this one, but I'll let you go first here. Who is number 1 on your list?
Yeah, all right. So since you dug deep, I have the obvious ones. So we're going to start with the most obvious guy, player of the week, Shake Milton. He was forced to miss 3 games due to contract tracing from Seth Curry's positive test. But since being inserted back into the lineup, he's had a combined 59 points in 2 games off the bench for the Sixers. I told you to get on the Shake Milton bus last semester, and you thought I was crazy. So I'll gladly welcome you back on. There's still plenty of tickets available. He's got to be one of the leading candidates for 6th Man of the Year.
Shake and bake. Matt, I also had him on my list, so you're not far off. Hey, I've had him on my player of the week list before. I don't think that was the first time I had him. He's a pretty solid player, and he complements, I think, the Sixers really well because, they need a guard who can really create. So if he can do that on a consistent level, especially like you said, coming off the bench, I think that's a great role for him. He can play either guard spot, either point guard or shooting guard, which really complements guys like Seth Curry and Ben Simmons and Danny Green. But as long as he knows his role and he's consistent, I definitely think he'd be a good player for the Sixers. I'm not hating on Shake Milton here.
Good, as you shouldn't, dude. He's a king. And as you said, he's great off the bench. The Sixers have been looking for a bench scorer for years. This is what this team has coveted. He can shoot. He can create his own shots, and he can pass the ball pretty well. I love Shake Milton. I love watching him play. Yeah. No bias, though. No bias.
Yeah, I mean, Shake and Bake, that's easily one of the best names in the NBA. Shout out Ricky Bobby. But since I also had him on my list, Matt, let's see if we go 2 for 2. Who else made your list?
Well, like I said, I was going to do the obvious players, so I'm going to have Kevin Durant. Why anyone thought this dude wasn't going to continue to be one of the greatest scorers ever is beyond me. In his last 5 games, he's carried the Nets when Kyrie decided he didn't want to do his job, and he has scored 36, 34, 26, 42, and 30 in his last 5 games. Now, Hunter, is that good? Because that seems good.
It sounds pretty good, Matt.
Yeah, that seems like a good some good stats right there. Obviously, the Achilles injury has not slowed him down. He's at over a year off of basketball, and he has come back looking just as good as he was when he left.
Yes, Kevin Durant is a good basketball player. That is our cold take of the day here on Ball Don't Lie. I mean, I think we got to start talking him in MVP conversation. Now, perhaps having Harden and Kyrie there might maybe minimize, kind of wash out some of the votes. Kind of, in my opinion, what happened to LeBron last season. I still think he should have been the MVP, but that's neither here nor there. But the Nets are going to be probably toward the top, if not the top, of the Eastern Conference standings. And if Kevin Durant keeps hooping like he does, and we both think that's going to happen, he has to be in the conversation.
Absolutely, no doubt. And I like you said with them having a lot of stars on that team, it could hurt his MVP chances. But he's easily the comeback player of the year this year, no doubt.
Yeah, and while I might have called Victor Oladipo overrated, I got to give him credit. He had a great game in his opening debut for the Houston Rockets, 32 points, 5 assists, 9 rebounds. That is the most amount of points in any debut in Houston Rockets history, other than James Harden, who had a calm 37 in his first game with Houston. And there's been a lot of really good players that have played for the Rockets, over the history of that franchise. Let's not forget about that Hall of Fame talent. So Victor Oladipo, I'm not sure he's even going to be a Rocket for that long. It sounds like he is not. That's not where he wants to be. He wants to get traded somewhere else. That's what the rumors have said. He has not publicly said that, but that is what the things have been being said surrounding Victor Oladipo's status in Houston. He obviously didn't ask to get traded there. So, Matt, what do you think kind of happens for him if he keeps playing this well and proving that he is a really good player? That probably only helps the Rockets, right?
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I think for Oladipo, he's probably looking at this situation like he sees the direction of the Houston Rockets right now. They don't really have a clear direction. They're kind of one of those middle-tier teams, which is probably the worst place to be in the NBA is mediocrity. So I think he'll probably look to, especially at this stage in career, he wants to get traded to a good team. And he's going to be a free agent after this year. He's going to want to go to a team that has serious title chances, and I don't think that's going to be this Houston Rockets team this year.
Yeah, looks like we both had 2 PG counties from the DMV, both on our list there. Fun fact there, being Kevin Durant and Victor Oladipo. So, Matt, who else made your list? Round it out here.
Luka Doncic. Luka has been notching triple doubles with ease, and he makes basketball look so effortless and easy. The other night against Chicago, he hit a triple double by about the middle of the third quarter, and the Mavs still lost by 16 at home to the Bulls. Someone figure out that team. But Luka Doncic, he's having an MVP level season. I just hope the rest of the team can carry along.
Yeah, I mean, Luka has been pretty good this year. He actually, after that game, he apologized. He thought it was his fault that they lost that game. He blamed it on himself. He thought he was a little bit of stat padding there. You don't want to fall into that, Russell Westbrook category where people just, kind of look at you more for your numbers rather than your impact. But Luka Doncic, that was my MVP pick entering the season. He's probably not the front runner as it currently stands, but I don't really overreact to anything until we hit like All-Star break, because that's when I think we really start to figure out who teams are. Like the fact that the Knicks and the Cavs are like in the playoffs, I'm like, all right, let's calm down these teams. Julius Randle is not the next LeBron James. Can we please calm down? but gotta give him credit. He has had a good season, and so is RJ Barrett, Matt. But your favorite player. Speaking of the Cavs, that is who rounds out my list here, and that is Andre Drummond. Now, he opted in. He's like, look, I'm not foregoing $30 million. I will easily opt in my contract and get these numbers and secure that bag. I respect it. At least he was upfront and honest about it. But he had a 33 and 20 game the other night, and he's averaging 25 and 19 over his last 4 games. That is dominant, leading the league in rebounds like he typically does. He might be a bit of a turnover machine, but at least he also gets it done on the defensive side of the ball, which is good. And he became 3rd all-time in career 2020 games. He passed Hakeem Olajuwon. The only guys he's behind is Wilt Chamberlain and Dwight Howard. So maybe Andre Drummond hasn't been a super, winning, successful NBA player, but he's a really good NBA player. He's made All-NBA before. He's a multi-time All-Star. And if he keeps playing like this, I think perhaps the Cavs, given that they are a rebuilding team, they traded for Jared Allen. They also have JaVale McGee there. Perhaps they're able to get a lot of draft capital for Andre Drummond. They look pretty smart making that deal because a lot of people were questioning why they would trade for him from Detroit.
Yeah, it was a questionable trade last year for sure. But I think, with Andre Drummond, you know what you're getting. He's not going to shoot the ball, but he's going to dominate inside. He's going to get every board that comes his way. He's going to play some good defense. In terms of trading, you could look at a team like Brooklyn, who just traded their center to Cavs, might be calling Cleveland back up again and trying to get Andre Drummond to come from make that spot a little bit more formidable for that team. But that is a lot of money, so we'll see about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to afford that because Andre Drummond, I believe, is getting paid like $30 million this year, which is absurd. But he, Yeah, I'm not sure. But he would be a good fit, though. A very similar game to DeAndre Jordan, but probably even a lot better on the offensive side of the ball. But that's going to wrap up our players of the week here. And like we said earlier in the podcast, we're going to be talking about life outside the bubble here and some of the struggles the NBA has had. They have canceled, as of it currently stands, 15 games have been postponed. I like the idea they did of splitting up the season, having like a first half and second half of the season where they've released the first half of the schedule and they're going to release the other half later so they can make up lost time. But 15 games is a lot. And, players like James Harden and Kyrie Irving, they've been blatantly, not following protocol, whether they wanted to or not. They were leaked at parties and whatever have you without masks, currently blatantly not following protocols, while there's probably so many other players not doing that and staying at home and trying to do the right thing. And obviously it doesn't give a great look for the NBA. But the thing that I'm not really a big fan of is when we were in the bubble format, we saw players like, just walk outside to get Grubhub and they had the quarantine in a quarantine area for 10 days. And then we go after Lou Williams. We go after, all these guys that were, not doing the right thing, and understandably so. But I just don't think Harden and Kyrie, I think they're getting, superstar treatment here. Let's be honest. They're getting treated like they're not other players. And I think in this situation, I don't think that's fair. And I just don't think it's a good look for the NBA. What do you think, Matt?
I think that's a good point to bring up, Hunter. I think that's fair. I think, things are obviously a lot more strict in the bubble because I think they took it more serious than they do now, which is a shame because COVID numbers are still probably the same and probably even worse now than they were over the summer. But it definitely doesn't feel like star treatment. And in terms of how the NBA has handled this whole thing and if they're taking it seriously or not, I think they're trying to take it seriously, and their protocols suggest that they are taking it seriously. But their unwillingness to postpone games even just a week or two ago due to COVID was shocking to me because, as you said, they have broken up the season into two parts, and they do have that week or two long break where they could reschedule games theoretically and put those games there. And the fact that they did not postpone games, not even from a Sixers fan perspective, but the fact that the Sixers were forced to dress an injured player to play that game against Denver a couple weeks ago was crap. And especially when the Celtics Heat game got canceled literally the next day, the Sixers have been feeling so Adam Silver's wrath since the process began, and it's crap. And that's my spiel. But in all seriousness, though, with all this health and safety protocols in this league that they're trying to implement, the fact that game was played was crap because, they're putting a whole new batch of people at risk with the Denver Nuggets, playing that game, and the Sixers were forced to play dudes 40 minutes a game that are used to playing 10 to 15 minutes a game. So there's just a recipe for disaster, and I hope they figure it out because this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think something that I've noticed within sports and how certain teams in certain situations are dealt with, money talks. I mean, I don't want to bring up because I think the NFL did a way better job than the NBA has done so far. Less games, but a lot more players and stuff to have to be held accountable. And they had not nearly as many issues. There was only a couple. But I remember, they literally played a guy at quarterback who was a practice squad wide receiver.
Yeah, the Broncos. Yeah,
yep. Who played, this guy, wasn't a quarterback since college. He was a wide receiver and just got thrown in there. And then you have the Baltimore Ravens, though. They keep pushing this game back.
Yep.
They had their issues. It's you got to be consistent here. And I think that's what it is with the NBA. It's like you do this to the Sixers, but then this happens with the other game. I think it's, look, these are weird times and, no one's going to be perfect here. But I think the one thing that people can be honest about and respect is consistency. As long as things are going to be consistent, you're going to treat everything the same and take the same protocols no matter what the circumstances are. You can disagree with them, but at least you're consistent, and I can at least respect that. But it seems like, people keep falling victim into picking and choosing what's right and what's wrong. And not being consistent with themselves. So I think the NBA, as long as they can remain, concise and to the point and consistent, I keep saying that word, I think that will lead to less issues.
I agree. I totally agree with that, Hunter, and especially with, the James Harden, Kyrie Irving thing, and then with the Sixers thing, that it is the star treatment. That's exactly what it is. We're making the same point, just in different situations. And, I think I can agree with the consistency thing where if they do the same thing for everybody, treat everybody the same, treat all the teams the same, which they obviously will not, because they want money talks, like you said, It's trying to put that money where your mouth is and be consistent and put people's health and team's health overall above the money.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to come down to. And Matt, do you think at some point the league's going to resort to a bubble? Maybe it's, to finish the regular season. Maybe it's for the playoffs. I'm not sure. Now, we also don't know what the deal is going to be with the vaccine. Apparently, there's a chance that the NBA might actually, start giving the vaccine to players as soon as they possibly can. That was released today, but there's not a whole lot of clarity on that yet either. It's just kind of an idea thrown out by Adam Silver. But do you think that they're going to resort to a bubble at some point so they can guarantee, especially maybe in the postseason, that they can get these games done?
I 100% do not think they will go back to a bubble. If anything, I guarantee they'll do quite the opposite and try to get fans at some capacity into all the arenas by playoff time. Because we're going to go back to the money talks thing, and especially with the vaccine beginning to make its way around the country, and with Adam Silver saying today that he wants the entire league to start getting vaccines. I just don't think there's a way they're going to try and go back to a bowl because they lost so much money. And I think if anything, they're going to try and get some of that money back and start getting butts in seats again.
Yeah, and looking at other leagues like the NFL, we saw teams that didn't even have fans in the stadiums start having fans in the stadium. So I think maybe the NBA, different sport, but maybe they, like you said, Matt, they do the same thing. So that's a very good point to bring up. I feel like a lot of people aren't bringing that point up, but I'm glad you did. But let's talk about some teams that haven't had a good start to the season. COVID perhaps is the blame. It could be other reasons as well. But let's talk about the Tampa Bay Raptors. The Toronto Raptors, but they have been playing in Tampa Bay all season. But they're 5-8. I don't think anyone will expect them to get off to that bad of a start. But they are in a 3-game winning streak, so that's good. The talk of the town, though, Matt, has been Chris Boucher. I don't think anyone really thought this guy was going to be that, much of an impact player. But he went from being a guy who got literally no minutes during that NBA championship run the Raptors had a couple seasons ago. So now he's averaging 16 points, 7 rebounds, 2.5 blocks, shooting 60% from the field, 47% from 3, and 78% from the line. Also has the second best player efficiency rating in the NBA at 29.84. So Matt, do you think that the Raptors can eventually pick it up here and become one of those top tier teams in the East again?
I'm not sure about top tier, but I think they can turn it around, probably make that play-in tournament. They could sneak their way back into the top 6 in the Eastern Conference to avoid that play-in tournament. But I think at this point, we've seen what this team is, and I saw this team being like this from the beginning of the year when we were doing our conference previews. Is that this team is mediocre. They don't have a lot of those star potential. They don't have that guy that can carry the team. Kyle Lowry's getting up there in age. Their team is built around depth. And they do not have the same depth they did last year or 2 years ago when they went on their finals run. And I do like Chris Boucher. He's got quite the Twitter cult following there. But he's a great player. But I just don't think this team that is going to be a title contender, not going to be an Eastern Conference contender. I think they're probably on the downturn of that title window that they had.
Yeah, you definitely weren't that high on the Raptors entering the season. I remember that, and so far they have proven you right. But yeah, I'm curious to see because I do believe that they will turn it around. They haven't been as dominant on defense as they have been in the past. Seems like Pascal Siakam I won't say take a step back, but he hasn't been off to the greatest start of the season. It seems like they're frustrated. I kind of wonder if being away from their family for so long, I doubt, especially the people who have like wife and kids and are in school and they have their own jobs. I'm assuming they're pretty much just living by themselves in Tampa now. I do wonder if that's had an effect on the team at all. Now that you're in a new city, you kind of weren't seeing it coming either. It kind of just happened. And that they're homesick and they miss their families because the Raptors were in the bubble and now they're basically kind of in the bubble again now that they're in a new city. And Tampa Bay is nowhere near Toronto. It is opposite sides of North America. So I do kind of wonder if that has had any impact on it.
Yeah. I think in certain situations it has, and I think in this situation it's definitely true. But to look at it from the other way, just to play devil's advocate, I mean, they just played in the bubble for 3 months, and in these uncertain times and playing in front of no fans or little to no fans in their case, since they have some fans down there in Tampa, nothing is normal. At a certain point, you had to stop making excuses about stuff you can't control and start performing. But I do tend to sympathize with the fact that they have not seen their families in forever. They're playing in a whole new city that, as you said, is in a whole different country and on the whole opposite side of North America, like you said. So it's a tough situation, and I think it has affected them a little bit. But also they are professionals. They're used to playing in situations that aren't necessarily the best for them, especially in this year where we've seen a lot of teams and a lot of personnel have to make a lot of big sacrifices. So.
Yeah, I totally agree where you're coming from there, Matt. And that's what we do on Ball and Line, which I give as many perspectives as we can, not, push the agenda in any way, shape, or form. So you can make your own decisions. That is what journalism is in society. But let's talk about the Miami Heat. This team, perhaps a little bit of a NBA Finals hangover, if you will. They are 5-7. They've lost 4 of their last 6 games. I will say, though, Jimmy Butler has missed some time. So has Tyler Hero. And Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero both have had great starts to the season. They both have definitely taken a step forward. So is Duncan Robinson. Team's not nearly as good on defense. They are 3rd to last in blocks. They have struggled to defend the 3-point line as well. It also seems like they really just can't find a replacement for Jay Crowder. Not that he was the best player, but they don't really have that stretch 4 that can really, do what Jay Crowder does on the defensive side of the ball and create floor space for guys like Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. So, Matt, let me ask you, is this maybe just perhaps a rough start to the season because of a couple moving pieces, or maybe there's some underlying issues in Miami?
With Eric Spoelstra as their coach and with them having a good mix of veteran leadership and young talent, I believe they'll begin to turn it around, especially with Jimmy Butler coming back. With that being said, it's clear to me that they've taken a little bit of a step back. Maybe it's fatigue from their championship run, as you said, or maybe they were just a flash in the pan. Maybe they just got hot at the right time last year in the bubble. I think they are a good enough team to make the playoffs, and I think they'll eventually be out of, this rut they're in. And I think they'll eventually be a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference to avoid that play-in tournament coming into the postseason. But in terms of if they're the same title contenders we thought coming into the season, I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I feel like we need to, not overreact early on in the season here. Let's also not forget, while maybe the Lakers have been, still playing insanely well, but the Heat, they played basketball not that long ago. So, they're in the same situation as the Lakers are there. So, maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not quite sure. Losing Jay Crowder has been a lot bigger issue than people would have thought. And maybe they really should have signed him back because he's playing really well in Phoenix right now, and the Suns are rolling. But yeah, I think they'll get back on track and they'll climb their way toward the top of the standings. But let's look at the New Orleans Pelicans. This was a team that I was really high on entering the season. They were on a 5-game losing streak until a recent win against the Kings. Now, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, they have both done their thing. They have been all-star level contributors. Even Nickeil Alexander-Walker, he has scored the most amount of points in his first 3 starts in NBA history. Just a little fun fact for you there. But then you got Lonzo Ball. He has struggled this season, and he was someone who did not look good in the bubble at all. People were wondering what happened with him, and he has unfortunately carried those bad habits over, not even shooting 40% from the field, not shooting around 30% from 3 and 60% from the foul line. Those are awful numbers for any player, especially a guard in a guard-heavy league that relies a lot on, shooting, and averaging below 5 assists per game. So he's not really, getting players involved. The ball's been out of his hands a lot more than it normally has, and I think a lot of people thought he'd get more ability to run the offense with Drew Holiday not there anymore. So what do you think, Matt? Do you think that Stan Van Gundy can maybe start stringing out some wins after a rough start to the season?
Well, in terms of Lonzo Ball, I'm glad you brought that up. His shooting numbers are starting to look a little bit like that Australian guard playing up in Philly. But he struggled mightily shooting the ball, and you just can't be that bad at shooting as a starting point guard in the NBA and also not be a great perimeter defender. Like you have to give some kind of value. And in terms of Stan Van Gundy getting them back on track, this is still a young team, and people often forget that since Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and Lonzo Ball have all been in the league for a bit now. They came in the league with the Lakers. I think they can turn it around, and they'll definitely be in that play-in tournament at the end of the season. I'm just not fully convinced they'll make much noise after that.
Yeah, I don't think they would somehow upset a top team in the Western Conference, but I think making the playoffs would be a big win for New Orleans. I think they might be able to figure it out. Like you said, new coaching system, still a young team. They have all-star talent there, even despite being young, and some players maybe just aren't playing as well. But I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker needs to get more burn in there because this kid is really good. Liked him a lot out of Virginia Tech. Didn't play a lot last year, but I think he might honestly deserve the start, if I'm being completely honest there. He might be the most impressive guard that they currently have on that team because Lonzo Ball's not playing great. Eric Bledsoe's missed some time. We obviously know what J.J. Redick is. He's a three-point shooter, three-point specialist. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker can do a little bit of everything. Also, he's cousins to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It's a fun fact, Matt. Not sure you knew that or not, but yeah. Again, they have the Alexander in their name, I believe. So fun fact. But so that's nice family bloodlines there. But I still like the Pelicans. I'm not going to, again, stand down just because they had a rough start to the season. I think they'll get back on track.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, the young part is an important part to bring into the equation here because their two best players are both under 25 years old. Zion Williamson is barely, I don't even know if he's at drinking age yet. And Brandon Ingram, he's still really, really young. And Brandon Ingram is, of course, still, I think this is his 4th or 5th year in the league. But he's still under 25 years old. He's still a very young guy. So, I think they'll start clicking too, especially with the new coaching system being put in there. I think they'll start clicking eventually.
Yeah, I think so too. But let's talk about a team that has been as affected by COVID as just about anybody. And that's the Washington Wizards. They got off to a 3-8 start to the season. 5 games, Matt, have been postponed due to COVID concerns, and they're hoping to resume practice soon. We'll see how that happens. They have the leading scorer in the NBA. Bradley Beal is averaging a calm 34.9 points per game, and that's by far leading the league in scoring. Westbrook also, he has gotten his numbers, flirting with a triple-double to average this season, but has also missed some time due to nursing a quad injury. Thomas Bryant, he's out for the year with a torn ACL, their starting center. It's not looking good in Washington. I thought this was a team that maybe could have vied for a playoff spot. They are not really looking like that right now. I just thought, hey, they have 2 top 10 players in the Eastern Conference. That might be enough, but maybe it's not. Maybe the rest of the team is just that doo-doo. But do you think Scott Brooks might be the first coach fired this season?
There's not a doubt in my mind that he'll be fired before the season ends. I mean, you just can't have this great of an offensive team and simultaneously have the worst defense this side of the Mike D'Antoni Suns and continue to have a job. I just think, especially with Westbrook, listen, I've had my spiel about him so many times in this podcast. I just don't think he's a good player anymore. He can't shoot. He turns the ball over so much. I watched the Wizards play a couple of times this season because they played against the Sixers, and they just have not looked good at all. Bradley Beal has looked awesome. He needs to get out of DC, but he just continues to say the right things and continue to say that he wants to be there. But I don't know how much longer he can keep that up.
Yeah, and that's a great transition, Matt, to our next point. We're gonna be talking about James Harden, first player, big time player to get traded. Who is next? And it might be Bradley Beal. He is a fantastic player, and I'm sick and tired watching him waste his years in Washington. Now, I respect them for going out and getting Russell Westbrook and trying to make something happen there. Bradley Beal is signed long-term, but that doesn't mean he's going to be there long-term because he can easily request a trade at any given moment. We've obviously talked a lot about Bradley Beal being traded and some potential destinations like a Dallas or a Memphis or any of teams like that. Philly, yep, like you said. It doesn't look like they want to make a drastic move, but I think Bradley Beal would be the right drastic move there. We talked about why he's fit so well there. So listen to some of those earlier podcasts, if you will.
Yeah.
But do you agree, Matt? Do you think Bradley Beal is the next one traded? And since you're pretty good at guessing when these guys are going to get traded, when do you think this one's going to happen?
Well, I would like for Bradley Beal to be the next move because, as you've said, I'm tired of watching him play in DC. Whether he comes to the Sixers or not, as much as I would love him to play with the Sixers, he just needs to go to a different team where he's going to have some playoff situations there, playoff implications. But I actually think the guy who's most likely to get traded is Zach LaVine. He seems like, LaVine, he's experienced nothing short of an underappreciated breakout in his career in a Bulls uniform. They've not only seen no success in his time there, but they've also seen no improvement. And that's the big thing for me. I think it's best for him to take his talents elsewhere. And he's on a really, really team-friendly deal, cheap contract. He's young. He's got a lot of energy. He's getting better defensively. He's not great, but he's getting better defensively. He can shoot. He can score at will. And he can dunk really cool. So that's fun. Sixers, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, I think those are definitely the 2 guys. The 3 guys, I think entering this last season, it was them and Devin Booker, but Devin Booker now is in a great situation in Phoenix, and I don't think he wants to go anywhere anytime soon. So now look at Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine. Both of these front offices have had so much turmoil and turnover since both of them have been with those teams. They have both been great individual players. Zach LaVine, probably one of the most talented players not to make an all-star game, and he's pretty much never gonna unless he gets lucky and the Bulls just somehow are somewhat good one year. And then you got the Washington Wizards. Beal has made all-star games, but he also missed it last season because, they're going to give it to someone who's on a winning team. And that might make Bradley Beal mad, but perhaps you force your card and you want to go somewhere else. Maybe the Lakers make a move for him if they want to make a power move. And, they got some assets now to get Bradley Beal. You never know. And like we said, Matt, the aggressive teams are going to stay aggressive. That's their instinct. I kind of also wonder Karl-Anthony Towns could be somebody too if that situation doesn't work out. Maybe if Kyrie Irving's that much of an issue with the Brooklyn Nets, maybe they're like, screw it, we already have Harden, we'll get rid of you. But I do tend to agree, Matt. I think LaVine and Beal are definitely the two guys to look out for that get traded.
I think it would take a lot for Kyrie Irving to get traded. I think it'd be another type of situation like this. But
you can make it happen, though. I don't doubt him.
We should not doubt him anymore. That's for sure. I think Karl-Anthony Towns, though, is an interesting name to bring up because, there's a lot of center need teams around the NBA, and his kind of talent at that position does not come very often. But I don't know if Minnesota is willing to move on from him just since they just got D'Angelo Russell there too, even though they've seen pretty much no improvement in terms of their record. They are a very young team though, and they still suck at defense. So maybe give them a little bit more time to turn it around, but we'll see.
Yeah, I just want to throw some darts on the board, maybe just throw out some names that maybe we're not expecting. But while we just talked about some star players, we're going to bring back our All-NBA team. We're going to talk about the players that maybe deserve some more credit. This is going to be our All-NBA bench team. We're going to give 5 of our best players that we think who come off in that second unit and really make an impact, because we see teams that are deep and have strong benches are typically some of the best teams in the NBA. So Matt, I'll let you kick things off for us. Who made your list?
Number 1, Shake Milton. He is averaging 17 points per game off the bench, and he's been everything the Sixers have needed for years off the bench, a guard that can handle the ball and shoot. It's glorious to watch. It feels like everything he shoots goes in the basket, as he's shooting over 50% from the floor. He's the favorite for sixth man of the year, and there's no bias in that statement.
Yeah, I didn't put Shake Milton on my list, kind of because I thought you were gonna say it, so I didn't want to repeat ourselves, and I already gave him some love. But I'm gonna go with a guy who used to be a Sixer, and that's gonna be Lou Williams. And I get maybe he hasn't been as great to start off this season, but let's not forget this guy has won, I believe, 3 Sixth Man of the Years awards with 3 different teams. That is really impressive. No one's ever done it before, I don't think. I don't even think Jamal Crawford's done that. I think he only won it with 2 different teams. But Lou Williams is one of the greatest 6 men of all time. He's still a bucket, and I don't want to disrespect Lou Willville there like that.
Yeah, obviously, Lou Williams is obviously need to bring up, and I didn't put him on my list for that reason. I gave you that one a little bit too, so we're kind of doing the same thing there. But my next guy on my list is a Laker, Montrezl Harrell. He's averaging 14 points and over 7 boards a game off the bench for LA. He's been great for them, oftentimes playing well over 20 to 25 minutes and getting quality time with the starters and down the stretch. So he's one of those bench guys that plays the key minutes. He's the perfect player for this team off the bench too. He has a great attitude with that team.
Yeah, I also have him on my list. He's the reigning 6 man of the year. How couldn't I? But yeah, like you said, he's a perfect bench guy because what do you want with guys coming off the bench? You want energy, you want hustle, you want grit. He does all of that. That is a skill. People don't understand that. There are guys that are just going to outwork you and bring that energy no matter what. Not everyone can do that all 82 games, but Montrezl Harrell is one of those guys that does. Really talented offensive player, great offensive rebounder, one of the best charge takers in the NBA. Is always up there in that category as well. He obviously can score, has a mid-range game. He can, make a nice little 15 baseline shot. And he's a great, scorer as well. And as he's shown, very agile, can guard different positions. And perfect fit there for the Lakers when Anthony Davis is off the court or when he's on the court. They complement each other well and maintains that the low post presence. And how the Lakers just stealing from the Clippers like that? Like, what were the Clippers thinking? Like, that was almost too easy.
I know, that's crazy. I still can't believe he left the Clippers just to go across the other locker room and join the Lakers. That was a great signing for the Lakers at the time, and it looks even better now.
Yeah, but who else do you have on your list, Matt?
My third guy is from the Clippers, the other locker room we were just talking about. When you think of Clippers bench players, normally your mind goes right to Lou Williams. However, he's been hurt this season, hasn't put up nearly the same numbers, even though he was on your list. That's where Morris comes in, as he's been heating up the last couple of games with 18 and 20 in his last two respective games. He also brings the kind of attitude the Clippers bench typically represents with Lou Williams and Patrick Beverley. He has that dog in him. He is easily the most annoying player in the NBA. Just starts fights every time he's on the court. I can't stand him, but he's a good player.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. A lot of people thought that they weren't going to re-sign him, but I think after losing Montrez, they almost kind of had to. And he, like you said, Matt, had a rough start to join the Clippers. Took him a while to kind of figure out his role because he was doing whatever he wanted in New York. He was like the random guy who averages 20 points per game. That's like Jeremy Grant for the Pistons this season.
Yep.
But that was what Marcus Morris was last year. But he's been really, he's starting to figure it out for the Clippers, and they're going to need him to be a legit guy because he brings a lot to the table and has that playoff experience.
Absolutely. I think he, like we said, he has that dog mentality. He's a great guy to have in the postseason. He plays great defense. He gets under people's skin. That's exactly what you need in the postseason.
Yeah, you definitely need that guy. And I think he'll only get better as the season progresses. Someone I have on my list, it might sound funny because of who he is, but I got Jordan Clarkson, man. He is easily one of the best six men in the NBA right now. We saw it when he went to Utah. You think that, him and Donovan Mitchell couldn't play together, but Jordan Clarkson is a pretty dynamic player. He can score just about anywhere on the court. He's gotten a lot more efficient over the years. He's understood his role a little bit more, and now he's contributing to winning basketball, which he really hasn't done so far in his career. Utah's off to a great start this season. They're a really good team, and I think Clarkson definitely has a big reason for that.
Yeah, I like that you brought up Jordan Clarkson because he's not on my list, and I kind of forgot about him. We talked about him a little bit before on this podcast. He's kind of being an underrated bench player, and he got the contract he deserved out in there. And Utah, he fit really well out there. And Utah has been like a surprising team, kind of under radar team, like the Pacers are in the Eastern Conference out there in the West. The Jazz have been really underrated and been very, very solid so far this season. And I think Jordan Clarkson has had a lot of underrated part of that success.
Absolutely. And like you said, and they also got Bojan Bogdanovic back. Utah's a good team. Again, maybe not NBA championship level, but they're really, really good. And they're going to, I think be better this season than they were last season due to some of the losses they had. But Matt, we're up to number 4 on your list.
Yep.
Go crazy.
This is a rookie. Okay. And he was a rookie that I was not high on coming into the season. I kind of roasted the pick a little bit, but he's a really underrated guy on this list. That's Emmanuel Quickley. He's been so impressive as a late first-round pick off the bench for the New York Knicks. I watched the Knicks on Monday afternoon. Don't ask why. And while the game itself was torturous to watch, I found myself really impressed with Quickley. He plays with such great confidence and is a good passer and a great shooter. I don't think I've ever seen him miss a floater, which is ridiculous. He is a sharpshooter with a floater. I've never seen anything like it. And he does shoot the three ball pretty efficiently as well. He's perfect for that Knicks team, and I think he should be starting. I don't even know why he's on this list, because he should be starting for this team.
That's a great pick, Matt. Really, dug deep for that one. And a lot of people are roasting that Knicks pick. A lot of people were like, I don't know if Emmanuel Quickley is a first-round pick. And perhaps maybe it's because the Knicks are really young. He's getting an opportunity. But he's earned it. And like you said, Matt, he has made the most out of that opportunity. He has been one of the most underrated rookies, maybe because we're talking about other guys in the Knicks. Maybe it's because of the Knicks and we don't actually think they're going to draft well. But he has been really good. I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, and as I said, I was forced to watch the Knicks on Monday. So if I was going to watch it, I had to take something positive away from it. He was one of them.
That's good. I'm glad you took it away and brought him up on this podcast. Next on my list is going to be a guy who really made a name for himself in the bubble and has been really good since. That is Gary Trent Jr. for the Portland Trail Blazers. It's scary that they have multiple guards. And when CJ or Dame goes down, Gary Trent Jr. comes in. I expect him to kind of step up the most with McCollum being out for a while. Perhaps that's who they're going to put in the starting lineup. But Gary Trent Jr., great three-point shooter. He was always that ever since he came out of Apple Valley High School, ever since he went to Duke. But it's his ability to really come off of screens. Now he scores off the dribble. He can get to the basket. He's a lot more cut now, a lot more mobile, athletic, and much better conditioning. And I think he's definitely going to be a guy who's going to be in the running for sixth man of the year for a long time. And he plays down the stretch for the Blazers. He's not afraid to take big shots. He's hit some big shots. It was a big reason why the Blazers made the playoffs in the bubble, and he's been good ever since.
Yeah, he's kind of got that Montrezl Harrell role for the Lakers with the Blazers here. he comes off the bench, but he plays key minutes on the stretch and he hits big shots and plays great basketball. I'm glad you brought up the bubble here too, because that's when he really broke out, and that's when people really started to notice him, is when he was scoring 25 to 30 points consistently off the bench in the bubble and hitting threes at a ridiculous rate. And he's continued to do that this season, and I think he's going to walk himself into a pretty hefty payday down the line here, and eventually consideration for the Sixth Man of the Year.
Yeah, it's funny because that Duke team, they had Marvin Bagley, who went 2nd overall. They had Wendell Carter, who went 7th overall. They had Grayson Allen, who was a first-round pick. Even entering it, Trevon Duval was ranked the number 1 point guard in the country. Who would have thought that Gary Trent Jr. would have been the best NBA player of that bunch? I mean, I definitely wouldn't have thought that. But got to give him credit. He's put in that work. Obviously, his dad played in the NBA as well, so maybe he's got an ear to the streets there, and that definitely helped him out a little bit. But he's put in that work. He's a really talented player. So, Matt, last but not least, who rounds out your All-NBA bench team here?
I think it's kind of an underrated name, but a big name nonetheless because of his college days, and that's Trey Burke. He broke out with Dallas in the bubble last season and has continued to carve out a nice role for himself with the Mavs this season. He's only scoring 10 points per game off the bench, but he is playing a significant amount of minutes for them as a backup guard. He is obviously not going to get a lot of minutes because Luke is going to play the bulk of them, and Tim Hardaway is going to be the main 3-point guy, specialist in that game for the Mavericks. But Trey Burke has done the most with his minutes. He's been an efficient shooter, an efficient 3-point shooter, and he's continued the success that he had coming over to Dallas last season after getting waived by the Sixers because they chose to have Raul Neto instead of Trey Burke.
Yikes. Trey Burke has really found a home in Dallas. He was bouncing around from Philly and New York. Didn't work out in Utah for him. But it seems like Dallas might be the perfect fit for him. And he has a nice, distinct role. Rick Carlisle does a good job playing to his strengths and doing what he does well and putting him in a situation to succeed. It's pretty funny. They got that 2013 national championship backcourt with Trey Burke and Tim Hardaway Jr. coming from Michigan. Trey Burke's been awesome for them. And I remember, really, I had a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun watching him play for Dallas during that bubble run. And I'm glad to see that he's found the home and he's been successful ever since, because that's definitely a team I'd want to be on for a long time, given the young talent they have there.
Oh, absolutely. I like that he's carved out a nice role for himself. He deserved a chance because I don't think he got a fair shake in Philly. I was very critical of Brett Brown over that. But that's a story for another time. Hunter, who is the last guy on your list?
I'm going to go with a guy who he has started some games this year because Jaren Jackson's been hurt, but he normally comes off the bench otherwise. So I figured I'd put him on here. And that's Brandon Clark for the Memphis Grizzlies. I've been very vocal about how much I've loved this guy since he's been at Gonzaga. I had him as a top 10 NBA player or top 10 prospect entering that draft, and he fell all the way past 20. The Grizzlies actually traded up just to get him. And it seems like they always strike gold when it comes to some of these draft picks, because him and John Morant in the same draft class, both of them first team all rookie. Clark's not really a scorer per se, like some of the other guys we have mentioned on our list, but he does all those does all the dirty work, if you will. He gets rebounds, he runs the floor, he's ultra athletic, he can guard basically 1 through 5 in a pinch. He's just an ultimate team player and a guy that you can play in a lot of different spots. And I think having that versatility is big, and the fact that he's really young, that's a huge cornerstone for the Grizzlies franchise.
I totally agree, Hunter. And I think, like you said, being able to guard anybody, that is a really, really, really valuable asset to have on your team, especially coming off the bench. I think, everybody needs that guy that they can trust to do the dirty work on their team. And, every good team has that. And, we've said it with Montrezl Harrell with the Lakers. We've brought him up a couple of times in referencing these other bench guys. And I think that's what he is to the Grizzlies, is he is their do-everything guy. He is their grit guy. And that's exactly what they needed on this team, especially with such a young team.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a Brandon Clark stan for quite some time, and I'm glad he's been proving me right. But that's going to wrap up our first Ball Don't Lie of this spring semester. This is the first broadcasting thing I've done since I've been back here at Penn State. Matt, I'm assuming you as well?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Wouldn't want it any other way. We'll be back in the studios on Monday for our first show for Penn State Sports Night this semester. And we'll be back here as well for Ball Don't Lie. So now that the season's has unraveled here, we are going to be, covering actual games, things actually having the live moment. Maybe a couple Woj bombs here or there. That'll be exciting. But that's going to wrap it up here for Ball Don't Lie. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.